This video focuses on understanding Piaget's stages. So remember, Jean Piaget is a cognitive researcher, and he believes that kids are active thinkers and they use schemas to understand the world around them and then the processes of assimilation and accommodation. But in doing that, he says that kids kind of progress through 4 different stages, and then we all end in the formal operational stage. To be a stage theorist means that there are going to be clear things that we can see kids can't do and that they can do. And then when they can do them, then that would be an indication that they've moved on to the next stage. So we're going to start with the sensorimotor period. And this period is from birth until 2 years. And so it's kind of in the title. When kids are little, they try to understand the world through their senses and through their motor function. So they look and they hear and they touch and they taste, they hold, all of those different things. And so we know that kids at the beginning of this stage are not capable of object permanence. So that's kind of a testable thing that you need to be aware of. And object permanence is the ability to realize that something exists even after it's out of your line of sight. So probably the best example of object permanence would be like peekaboo. I don't know if you've ever interacted with a tiny little baby, and you stand in front of them and you cover your face, and then you move your hands and they immediately start laughing at you and you're like, oh my God, I know I'm so funny. And then you do that and you do that and it's like a little thing you have. And then maybe a couple months later, you show up and you try to do the exact same game. So you put yourself behind your hands, you move your hands, and instead of the baby laughing, they just kind of stare at you like, really? And so that means that it's kind of a cool cognitive thing because it means that now they're capable of realizing that you're still right there. So that's object permanence. Another thing that kids are not capable of during the sensorimotor period is what's known as symbolic thought. So symbolic thought means that they can represent things in terms of symbols. Even the alphabet would be considered symbols. So think of kids drawing like squares and triangles to represent a house, or obviously drawing the letters of their alphabet or writing their name. They are not capable of that during this stage, but they would become capable of that during the following stage. So object permanence, they aren't capable of at the beginning, but as the stage continues, they would gain that by the end. Another thing that kind of pops up during this stage is what's called stranger anxiety. So around 8 months, kids have formed schemas for faces that are familiar to them, and it's difficult for them to assimilate new faces. So from 8 to about 24 months, they might develop a period of stranger anxiety. Where they get really upset when you put them with people that they don't know. Obviously, like think of like Santa Claus, Easter Bunny, all that like very Christian-based holiday stuff that's become a little bit pop culture in our society. So it becomes a norm to like put your kid on the Easter Bunny's lap or Santa's lap or whatever it might be when you go to the mall. But think about how creepy that really is. Like these kids have no concept of what that means. So that's where you get all those really fun, freaky baby pictures. All right, so that's the end of the sensorimotor period. As we transition into the next, it's called the pre-operational period. And here, this lasts from 2 years to 7 years old. They are going to become capable of symbolic thought. And then there's a bunch of other things that become strongly characteristic of this as well. So let's start with symbolic thought. My niece Presley, who was, I think, 5 years old when she drew this, she goes to private school, to be clear. My sister sent me a screenshot of this, and it was a drawing that Presley made at school. And when she got in the car, Katie said, Presley, this is really cute. Who is this little guy? And Presley said, oh, I drew that at school. It's Mr. Buttface. So look at that drawing. I don't know what she was trying to draw there, but to her, it's a very literal interpretation of exactly what his butt looks like. So she drew that at private school, but I thought that was kind of funny. So they do become capable of symbolic thought. So they're drawing things to represent humans or represent buildings or family or whatever else it might be. The other thing that is largely characteristic of the pre-operational stage is that kids are not capable of conservation. And conservation kind of looks lots of different ways, but probably the one that people show the most or that we use most to demonstrate this would be using liquids. So you put 2 liquids together. You can see that they're exactly the same size. You change the glass so you make one taller, as exists in the middle picture here. And then we ask the child which one has more, and they point to the taller one. So they're not capable of like reversing mental operations or things like that. It's actually the reason why, if you ever interact with kids, like I remember my other niece and nephew, Allie and Mason, when they were little, they didn't get a lot of like snacks and stuff. They ate very healthy organic foods. But I remember like taking them to the zoo and I would buy them cookies, and inevitably one cookie would break. And I remember Mason, who was younger, just freaking out and crying because Allie's cookie broke, and he kept saying, "She got two, she got two, she got two." And I like froze and I was freaking out. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what to do here. And then I like took a deep breath and thought about it, and I broke his cookie in half. And immediately he stopped crying and said, thank you. So that's another example of conservation. Other properties that are key to the pre-operational stage are called centration, irreversibility, and egocentrism. Centration is the tendency to focus on one aspect of a problem and ignore everything else. So they can only focus on one part. And then irreversibility is not being able to reverse a task, which was kind of demonstrated when I talked about the pouring of the beverage and how we might pour it into a taller glass. And then if we poured it back, in theory, the answer should be the same, but with kids at this stage, it's not. And then egocentrism is the inability to take someone else's point of view. So really just to like see things through somebody else's eyes. That's why kids also tend to lie more during this stage, even if they have great relationships with their family members or whatever. It's kind of like a cool part of cognitive development is them testing their limits. And they genuinely can't understand why it would hurt somebody else when they lie. Animism pops up here as well, which is just why like pretend play becomes so popular during this time. One more thing to talk about with this is called the theory of mind. This was talked about in your book. I'm only showing it to you because it is kind of a popular study. They literally might ask you about Sally and Anne and a ball in a cabinet. But theory of mind, even though kids are egocentric, when they develop a theory of mind, that's the ability to kind of like infer other people's mental states a little bit. So you can figure out belief, intent, desire, things like that. And you can recognize that it's different from what's in your own head. So the Sally and Anne graphic kind of demonstrates that. All right, next then we transition into the last two, which are a little bit quicker. Concrete operational stage is exactly that. That's where things that are very black and white and very concrete, kids can get pretty good at. So at this stage, they are now capable of conservation. They are also capable of reversibility and decentration. So that means they can do like adding and subtracting, all of that stuff that's like very black and white, very concrete. Different examples of conservation kind of exist here. So length, area, mass, number, volume, all of those things. So then the final stage is called the formal operational stage, and that's what you all are in right now. That's age about 11 through adulthood. And at this point, you are capable of abstract thinking. So logical and abstract thinking. I would say that abstract or hypothetical reasoning is the most common question to prove formal operation. So these would be like your higher level math classes where there's like X's and Y's and if this, then that, all of those types of thinking. So that would be the formal operational stage. And this is kind of all of the stages in summary. So I will quickly show you some video clips that just kind of demonstrate each of the stages. I'll try to move very quickly through that, so I'll skip around just a little bit. It's going to start with the sensorimotor stage.
New babies aren't quite sure what happens to objects when they leave their sight. Sky's mom keeps disappearing and reappearing. No wonder peekaboo is so much fun. During their first year, however, infants will learn an important concept: object permanence. Everything has a life of its own, even if it is out of sight.
At Maya's age, babies know to look for the object, but they might not have everything else straight. 10-month-old Simon is about to make a classic mistake. Although he watched us place the toy plane under the white cloth, he'll look for it where he last found it, not where he watched us hide it.
Can you look at these two glasses? Do you think that they have the same amount of juice? You think they have the same? Okay. Now we're going to pour this juice into this glass. Now, do you think that this glass has more juice, this glass has more juice, or do you think that they have the same amount?
That one has more.
This one has more, and why do you think that this one has more?
Because it's taller.
Okay, you ready? Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more quarters, or do they have the same?
1, 2, 3. Wait. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They look the same.
They're the same?
5, 5.
Okay. Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more, or do they have the same?
This one has more.
That one has more quarters?
Yeah.
Why does this row have more quarters?
Because it's more far away.
It's more far away?
Yeah, it's more far away than that. It's bigger.
All right, so there's lots of examples that we could look at with conservation there.
All right, we're going to
But
play a game with the grandpappers, and we're going to share. So first we're going to look at these two cups right here. Do you think there's the same amount of juice in
So
this
we're
glass
now
as
in
there is in
the
that glass?
concrete operational stage.
They're even.
They're even? Okay. So we're going to take the juice from this glass and pour it into this one right here.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to look at this glass and that one. So do you think that there's more juice in this glass, more juice in this glass, or do you think that they have the same amount?
Same amount.
Okay, why do you think that they have the same amount?
Just because this is skinny doesn't mean it's not the same amount. It has the same amount of juice in it, but this one is just wider and this one's skinnier, but they have the same amount of juice in it.
It says, if you hit a glass with a hammer, the glass will break.
I knew that.
And then this one says, Don hit a glass with a hammer.
I knew that too.
So what happened to the glass?
It broke
It broke. Why did it break?
because the hammer's hard.
If you hit a glass with a feather, the glass will break.
No, it won't.
And this is the second rule. Don hit a glass with a feather. What happened to the glass?
Nothing.
Nothing happened. Why didn't anything happen?
Because the feather was soft.
If you hit a glass with a feather, the glass will break.
Okay.
And the second one, Don hit a glass with a feather. What happened to the glass?
It broke.
And why did it break?
Because the rule says if you hit a glass with a feather, it'll break. So if you hit a glass with a feather, it broke.
I love that adolescent eye roll there. All right, so I feel like those videos, those short little clips, do a good job of just kind of like giving you an example of what each stage would look like. This should be a chart that, even though you may not write it word for word, you would be able to fill out. So it would be a good idea to practice filling that out.